Are we live? Yeah? Hey guys, so I'm Marc, this is Sam, we're the headphone testing, and we're going to be, this live stream is going to be focused on the HD 820 versus the 800S. We'll do the first 20 minutes on the focus topics based on the 820s and the 800S measurements. Then in the last 10 minutes, we'll have open questions about any headphone or any of our testing procedure. Again, during those first 20 minutes, try to keep the questions focused to the 820s and the 800S, but after that, you can ask us pretty much anything else. So yeah, let's get to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll start off with the first build quality things of the HD 820 versus the 800S, then we'll get to sound. So one of our first topics is, of course, the fact that the 820s are closed back and the 800S are open back, so that already has an effect on how breathable the headphones are. So I'm sure you can see the screen on the actual review. So the 800S being open, you'll be able to wear them for a bit longer without getting, like, not V-sweats, because that's for like eating, but getting your ears to be a bit warmer. You can see it compared to the 820s. Just move the wire a little bit. Thank you. So the 820s actually have a glass back, which obstructs a decent amount of airflow, and it's closed back. But the good thing is, since the ear cups are so large, your ears will get warm, but not as warm as like if you had the Sony's for WH-1000XM3, for example. Here, the 820s will make your ears a bit warmer than the 800S, but it shouldn't be much of an issue. And as long as you're taking a couple breaks during your listening session, you won't have any troubles in general with the breathability. Now, continuing with the build quality.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's getting 6.7 for the HD20, the breathability, and 800S 7.8. I haven't used the 820 for like a long period of time, but I'm assuming it's not going to be too terrible. I never had any like overheating issues with the 800S.
No, you're not. So the cutoff point for most closed-back headphones usually is around 6-degree difference, which that's like the Bose Quiet Comforts, most of like the Oppos and stuff like that. So they will make your ears a bit warm, but again, as long as you're like taking a break every hour or 2 hours, you won't feel much of a difference.
So the 820 for a closed-back headphone is not too bad?
Yeah, it's not too bad, especially because the ear cups are just so massive that you have enough room and a bit of airflow in there, which is fine.
Could you also open the YouTube link so we can see the live stream?
Oh yeah, of course. All right.
Yeah.
So next up is the build quality of the 820 versus the 800S. And here, there's not that much difference. They have about the same headband. You can see here, it's pretty much the same. The ear cups on the 820s are a little larger, just to accommodate the new closed-back design. However, on the side of the 800S, you might be able to notice we have a piece of tape there. It's not because the headphone is broken, but it has a pin that I'm gonna...
The headphone is kind of broken. The headband is broken. Yeah.
The headband is not broken, but the pin,
hinge, yeah.
The pin of the hinge does come loose, and it's the same hinge mechanism that is on the 820s. So most likely that might be the same issue in the long run, but again, it's not like the Edition X yokes where it's plastic and that breaks completely. Here it's just a pin that comes loose once in a while. So as you can see, just a piece of tape on top of it fixes that issue.
The whole hinge on the 820 is thicker than the 800S, but I don't think they changed anything about the pin section, so I think it's going to have the same issue. And we didn't use it too much until it kind of like fell apart.
Yeah, the hinges is thicker, but the mechanism is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming the thicker hinges is to be able to sustain the slightly larger ear cups. So the 820s also, in terms of build quality, they come with an extra cable. So you have, here, I'm gonna go through them.
So yeah, it comes with a 8-inch TRRS balanced cable, which the 800S didn't have. But then the rest of it is the same as 800S, so it has an XLR balanced cable. And
this is for the 800S.
Oh, okay. So this is for the 800S, this is for the 820.
Yeah.
And
so
the other cables that we have here is the unbalanced 1/4 inch TRS. So the 820 has an extra 8-inch balanced cable.
Okay. So we're going to start getting into the actual sound quality differences. And of course, just before we get to those, there's a couple questions that are specific to the 820s and the 800S. People are asking about the size of the drivers. Do you know the size of the drivers of the 800, 820?
No.
And if it's the same as the 800S?
As far as I know, actually, the driver is the same. I may be mistaken, but I think it's the same as the 800S. 800 is 60, 70 millimeters. I may be wrong,
I think
but
it's 60, but I can double check here.
It's pretty big.
It's pretty big. It would be nice, ideally, to have not necessarily a test, but a part of the website that does show the driver size for the headphones. But again, finding that information is very hard. Most companies don't advertise it or don't have it in their operating manual. So being consistent with that I said category will be a bit hard. But so let's get to the sound differences. Okay,
so first of all, the news is that the 820 doesn't sound as good as the 800S. The main problem with the 820 is their bass and mid-range. Their treble is nearly identical to the 800S. The bass of the 820 is pretty good if you get a proper seal with it, which we were able to get a proper seal on our dummy head. But when we measure the bass on people, we got a really big variance between the bass delivery. So the main problem with the 820 is their bass consistency. Their mid-range is also has a bump around 1K that the 800S doesn't. So, and also it has a big dip around 250, 300 hertz, which makes the sound a little bit thin on vocals, especially if you don't get a lot of bass in the bass section. But as I said, the treble is basically the same. So you're not going to hear that much of a difference in the treble range. But what you're going to notice is that it sounds a bit more honky or boxy compared to the 800S because of the bump in the in around 1K. And because of the dip in the 250, 300 hertz, it's going to sound a bit thinner on instruments and vocals. And the main issue, though, I would say, is the frequency response consistency.
Is the screen sharing working?
Should be.
Just double check.
Yes.
Not working now?
No, it's not on yet.
So yeah, it seems that we have an issue with the screen sharing. We wanted to show the frequency consistency of the frequency response.
Okay.
While we try to fix that, we'll answer a couple questions. So John Doe suggested that we measure sensitivity for the headphones. Mm-hmm. Again, in our to-do lists, we have, so on Asana, we have like a test bench suggestions and and tests that we want to implement, and it's a very long list. Sensitivity is part of
what we are planning on doing, which it's pretty high on the priority, but we don't know when we're going to get around doing it, is something about impedance and drivability, and we're going to have impedance of the headphones there, their sensitivity there, and something else that I think would be really helpful is like something like the maximum loudness that you could get out of the headphones on a mobile device, like the maximum loudness on a regular up-to-date iPhone. And that's going to be really important for wireless headphones too, because a lot of wireless headphones, the amp that they have don't get loud enough. And that's, for some headphones, that's one of their major shortcomings that we're not testing now, unfortunately. But yeah, that's on the to-do list.
So essentially, we have a lot of test benches that will come up. So we're organizing them by importance, difficulty, and priority. But sensitivity, impedance, level matching, and like maximum loudness are pretty
it's high on importance, also high on difficulty. So that makes it a bit difficult to do. Is the screen sharing working?
So it's working now?
Okay.
Go.
So on the left of the screen, could you open YouTube so
Yeah, of course.
we can see what's going on?
What's going on. There you go.
All right.
But you have delays.
But it'll be a bit delayed. But
Okay.
that's fine.
So on the left, you see the the frequency response consistency of the HD820. On the right, you see the frequency response consistency of the HD800S. And because it's a pretty big headphone, for the treble range, we do reseats on the dummy head and we move it around. Because these are so big, they basically cover the entire ear section of the head. So we can't really move it around. That's why they're really consistent in the treble range. I'm assuming it's going to be similar on people too. But the bass range we measured on people. And as you can see, we have more than like almost 11 dB of variance in bass delivery at 100 Hertz, which is really noticeable and not good. And it gets even worse as you go lower in the frequency range. And we have a microphone here that we use for measuring it on humans, which we can do a live measurement for you guys to see the difference between me and Marc. And we can also try it with and without glasses. We checked Marc's glasses don't make that much of a difference, but there are certain glasses with arms that are not really flush to your temple, and those actually break the seal and cause a big drop in bass. And we also prepared a few recording files that we recorded the sound of the HD800S and the 820 on the dummy head, and I adjusted the bass to simulate what I would hear or what Marc would hear for you to see how big a difference in bass you will get depending on the quality of the seal that you get on your head with these headphones. So do we do that now or do we do that later? Okay. So you can put the microphones in, and when you're doing that, I'll just play the music file.
Yeah.
So the disclaimer for this one is that this is not going to be the actual sound of the headphones, because you're going to hear them through your headphones, and it was recorded through the dummy head. But the thing you should pay attention to is the difference between the sound of the HD800S and HD820. So the first file I'm going to play is the sound of the HD800S on the dummy head. Then I'm going to play the HD820 on the dummy head, which gets the most bass of all the measurements we have done on this headphone. And then the next one is going to have 5 dB of drop in bass at 100 Hertz, and the next file is going to have 11 dB of drop in bass at 100 Hertz. So you can notice the difference in bass, the dip in the mid-range, and also the bit of like a boxy sounding of the mid-range of the HD820. So this is the HD800S. So this one is going to be the HD820, but without any EQ. So this is the actual frequency response we got on the head, which is a lot more bass than we get on people. So I would say that's like the maximum potential of the HD820 because it delivers the most bass. And if you have a lot of bass, it kind of takes care of that dip issue in around 250. But the 5 dB drop in bass, it's something that I get. So this is how I tend to hear the HD820 on myself. And this next one has 11 dB of a reduced bass, and this is what we get on one of our test subjects that wears glasses that is not really flush to his temple. He consistency gets the least amount of bass on our measurements. So if you don't get a lot of bass, you will notice the dip in the mid-range even more, which makes the sound not really good. So for the price, they're not the best headphone you can get. So time-wise, do we want to do the measurement on you, or do you want to?
Well, there's a relevant question
to
this. John Doe again asks, it seems like the 800 was tuned to produce bass with leaky pads, but the H20 has leather pads and the seal is improved. So do you think they were tuned the same, and it's just that they didn't account for the fact that the 820s were going to have a better seal and a closed back design, so like the reflections were causing a bit more bass? Like, what do you think?
So I may be not fully correct here. I had a discussion with a couple of people at Harman at some point, and they didn't see this exactly the way I see, but my experience has shown that when you break the seal on open back headphones, you actually don't get that much of a drop in bass. The drop in bass is the biggest issue on closed back headphones, like the passive ones that don't compensate for bass. So I think part of the bass you get is just the size of the, we have some noise here if you hear it, it's the neighbors.
The neighbors upstairs.
Part of the bass that you get with open back headphones is just how much air they move. The other part is they get the bass to your skull through contact. And the other part of it is how much seal they create. And closed back headphones, it seems, because they are tuned to have a proper, they're tuned when they have a proper seal. When the seal breaks, you get a big drop in bass. With open back headphones, I've like put it in even like a small pen between the dummy head and the headphones, and you get a drop in bass, but not as much as you get on a closed back headphone. So I would say open back headphones are better if you have a head that doesn't get proper seal on headphones, then go with open back headphones. Or get a noise cancelling headphone that compensates for that. Some noise cancelling headphones compensate for the bass that they deliver.
All right, we're going to move on so that we address all the topics. So we'll show you the frequency consistency with an actual measurement on my head and then on Sam's head.
I also have the measurements that I've done for the review on this computer, so if you want to see that, I can also pull that up, but first we're going to measure it on Marc.
So this is with the glasses.
Yeah. And we do the measurements only up to 2 kilohertz because it's going to be too loud and painful. So we reduced the level a little bit so it wouldn't be too loud for you guys. I think that a bit of a noise is because of the low volume of the test. But yeah, so that's the bass of the 820 on Marc with glasses on. Now we do it without glasses. So a little bit more, maybe.
But then again, my glasses are pretty flush with my head, so it doesn't break the seal as much as one of our test subjects, so Ian, instead of saying test subject. But yeah, so
he's working. We didn't want to disturb him just to bring him here as like a dummy head to do measurements on him. But we did a test run before the live stream, and apparently for some reason I'm not getting a lot of bass on the 820 now, maybe because of my beard. So this, hopefully, the measurement on me will going to show how much of a difference could be between people on the 820. If not, then I'll put glasses on and that should take care of it.
Okay, so we're reaching our 20-minute mark, but we might push it a bit more?
Yeah, we could.
We'll push it a bit
If
more.
there is more.
So we'll go to 30 minutes and then have an extra 10 to 15 minutes of open questions.
Somebody want to see the pad on the close-up?
Yeah.
You can show it to the side camera.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the bass that I get. Compared to Marc, I'm getting about 2 dB less bass, but if I move it around a bit, maybe I can show you. And I can put glasses on too. Well, let me just put the glasses on just because I want to put these glasses on. So if you're listening to HD820 with sunglasses,
Just realized I'm blind.
yeah. So now there is 4 dB, 4.5 dB of bass difference between me and Marc. And Marc and I actually tend to get pretty similar results. So if we had Ian on, he would get even less bass on the H20. We could do it also on the 800S. That would show that we get pretty similar results, but I think we can use the time for other things. Yeah.
So a relevant question to this. Chizora asks, do you think it's okay to add measurements with glasses to the average results because it's 2 different situations and results in about minus 2 dB in average for the 820? So do you think it's good to show the different measurements with glasses and without glasses for consistency?
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly, but I say what I'm thinking about our frequency response consistency section. So I think it's really good that we show different measurements on different people for you to see how they may perform on you. But the frequency response that actually we show in the review section is the average of all the 5 people that we measure. And that may not be the best way of representing the consistency issues of headphones. And there is no other way to show the frequency response as the average because we could have like different frequency responses if you have a lot of hair, if you have glasses, if you have like a big head. But we are thinking about making the frequency response score more consequential, so give it more weight or calculate it in the overall sound score in a different way. So more consistent headphones would get a better sound score overall. But right now, the average frequency response that you see is the average of the final frequency response that you see is the average of the 5 best bass measurements that we do. I don't know if I answered the question for him.
All right. So there was a previous question, but let's see if we have. Oh, perfect. So the next topic is Soundstage, and the question that I was about to read was about Soundstage. So what's the difference in Soundstage between the 820s and the 800S, and is it like really audible?
So I would say, well, answering this question is a little bit difficult because the perception of Soundstage is frequency response dependent. So if I add a lot of treble to a sound of a headphone, it could make the Soundstage seem bigger or natural, or more externalized. Because these two have different frequency responses, it's hard to actually judge the Soundstage in isolation. But the measurement shows that the Soundstage of the HD800S is closer to our loudspeaker reference. So you can read about how we measure the Soundstage of headphones. The reference we have is a loudspeaker 1 meter away and 30 degrees in front. And the measurement of the HD800S is more resembling the speaker. The HD820 has a bit of a frequency shift around 5 and 6 kilohertz, and also has a dip around 3-4 kilohertz, so it doesn't measure as well. And the other thing is that we measure the openness. We also take into account the enclosure of the headphones for their soundstage. Open back headphones tend to feel more open in terms of soundstage. And because the HD820 is more isolating and closed back, that's another reason for their lower overall soundstage. score, but because they're really big, the driver is really big, and they have a proper, good enough distance from your pinna and your eardrum, they do sound big. So their soundstage may not be as externalized or as natural sounding, or not as open sounding as the HD800S, but they do feel much bigger than a small headphone or like an in-ear. So these are going to sound bigger than like the M50 or like an in-ear or like an earbud, because the driver is bigger and is further away from your head, from your ears.
So one of the reasons why the 800S has kind of a more spacious soundstage is because of its isolation and leakage. So because it doesn't block any sound from, so it kind of immerses you in your environment, and the leakage does have a bit of cross talk. So how does the leakage and isolation performance affect the soundstage of the 800S compared to the 820s?
Hard to tell.
Okay.
There haven't been that many proper research done on the difference between the soundstage of open back and closed back headphones, but it seems that generally there are a couple of papers which weren't that specific, but based on those couple of papers and the general consensus that people have, the open back headphones feel more open, probably because of their openness. Leakage is a much smaller factor in soundstage, and if you look at the breakdown of the score, it's only 10% of the overall soundstage. We think that partially the closed back enclosure, the enclosure design of headphones have a role in soundstage, maybe because of the difference they have in terms of acoustic impedance on the ear. So the closed back headphones have more acoustic impedance and more pressure on the eardrum. That's why maybe they feel less open sounding. Hopefully I answered the question.
Okay. So we have pretty much touched on most of the topics that we wanted to touch here.
Well, the last one is that the HD820, because it's closed back, leaks less and isolates more.
I can show that. Does the screen sharing work? No, right?
No, but I
Can show the camera? Yeah.
Okay.
Show the other camera.
Okay.
I see it.
So it's getting an average score for isolation, the HD820. HD800S is super open, so it doesn't really isolate. Their leakage is also much better than the HD800S, but it wouldn't be something that you can like rely on in terms of being a quiet headphone. But it's much quieter in terms of leakage than the HD800S.
There was actually a follow-up question that's a bit further away that was talking about, so if, which one would you recommend when noise isolation isn't an issue? Kind of answered it himself, 800S probably, and we'll say definitely.
Yeah, 800S is a noticeably better sounding headphone. It's about $1,500 less costly, and this is my personal preference. Based on all the headphones that we have in the office and I've listened to, if you EQ the HD800S a little bit, so you add a little bit of bass, take a little bit of 250, 200 hertz out, and take a little bit of 6 kilohertz out, that will be the best headphone I've listened to. Without EQ, they're also really good, but with EQ, they're the best sounding headphones I've heard so far. The HD820, not so much. And you can still EQ it, but I don't think they actually have the potential of being EQ'd as much as the HD800S, because their bass is so inconsistent. So unless you measure it on yourself, you don't know how much bass adjustments you have to make to these headphones to make it sound right.
Okay. All right. So how do you feel about EQing and using DSP to change the kind of sound profile of?
I feel good about it.
Yeah.
Some people are purists. They don't like to EQ their headphones or their speakers or the room.
For example, we have Conan Basic here. Says DSP and EQ usage is on par with Satanism. So
Okay. All right.
I think we have his opinion.
I don't identify as a Satanist, but I would say that reasonable amount of EQ is a good thing. In my opinion, whenever you EQ something, you're adding some issues too, but you always have to weigh the advantages and disadvantages of your EQ. And there are things in a headphone that it's really hard to fix by designing it by acoustics. And for that, you use a bit of EQ. And I would say, yeah, if you're fixing it like a narrow peak or bump, which is like 20 dB, adding that much EQ is going to cause a lot of problems. But if you're just adjusting the bass by like 4 or 5 dB, that's not a problem. And in my opinion, makes the sound overall better.
Cool. So we're done with the focused section of the 820s versus the 800S. So we're in open sections, open questions. So if you have any questions about these headphones, about any of the headphones we've reviewed so far, don't hesitate.
About our tests, if you have suggestions to improve anything.
Yeah. We have 10 minutes of free discussion, so let us know. In the meantime, John Doe wanted to see the pads of the 820, so we can compare them to the 800S.
So I want to see whenever it shows up on that screen.
Might be a bit delayed.
Yeah, so sorry if I'm like holding it and not doing anything. Okay, so this is the HD820, which is significantly thicker than the HD800S. If you keep the YouTube open so I can see what I'm doing.
Of course.
And the texture is also a little bit different. A little bit. And yeah, so the HD820 is a lot more plush. HD800S is really narrow, but super comfortable. And yeah, it's leathery also on the sides of the HD820.
So yeah, the leather is on the outside of the pad. Inside
hopefully
it's like microfiber, similar to what's on the 800S.
Hopefully it's visible. Yeah, I think
normally should be visible.
Easy to
Yeah,
see.
I think that should be visible. So a couple more questions. John Doe also asked, what mic are these?
I don't remember the exact model number. I can send it to you. It's made by Sound Professionals, so the website is soundprofessionals.com, and it's under binaural microphones. Their bass is slightly off, so I had to calibrate it to match what the dummy head gets. Out of the box, they're decent, but they're not going to be fully calibrated. But when we calibrated them, they perform really well.
Okay. Yeah. So again, like we mentioned, this is an open discussion. So if you have more questions about any headphone in particular, let us know. Do we have any plans of reviewing the Focal Utopia?
Not at the moment. It's really expensive, and because we buy our own headphones, we have to weigh the price of them to see if it's worth getting. The HD820, we thought it was worth getting. They didn't perform as well as we thought they would. So the Utopia, we don't have any plans on doing it in the near future.
Okay. So the lever being on the outside. Another question from Don Doe. Is another reason for the inconsistent seal. Sennheiser probably chose it because of the full leather pads would have been too hot. Yeah, most likely, yes. The microfiber padding, you also see them a lot on like gaming headphones. It's mostly to be able to like keep the temperature relatively low. And it's better for breathability. But yeah, definitely the leather on the outside does seal a bit of heat inside the ear cups, and then being closed back, I think they had to find a good middle ground.
But I was a bit disappointed, and it's also something that I mentioned to Marc, that it's a $3,500 Canadian headphone, $2,000 plus US headphone. It has glass on its back, so it's a pretty premium, and also something that hasn't been done before. This is probably the first headphones with glasses. And they could have like put in a battery and an active system to compensate for the bass. And the Bose QC35 does it. The Sony 1000X series headphones do it. The MPOW H5 noise cancelling headphone also does it. And the bass is super consistent across all the 5 people that I measure. They could have done it here too. And maybe some audiophiles wouldn't have liked it, but the sound would have been consistent. And they could have actually EQ'd the 250 hertz dip also.
So when you're saying compensate, it's more for consistency than the fact that it's a bit too bass heavy, or both? In this case?
They could have fixed the consistency, like the Bose and the Sony and some other noise cancelling headphones don't have any consistency issues. And they could have also adjusted the bass a little bit and the 250 hertz dip. So if they put an active system in it with a battery, it would have fixed all of those, but they chose not to, which for that price, I was a bit disappointed.
Okay, a couple more questions. So compare the HT800S to the Hifiman Ananda. Which one would be better in your opinion? So we actually have the Anandas right here. All right, do you think you can open up
The review?
The review, yeah.
What's your opinion, Marc?
I'm leaning a bit more towards the Anandas just because the 800S sounded a little brighter to me. When the 800S is EQ'd, it's like by far one of the better critical listening headphones. But with the default EQ, with the default frequency response, I would say the Anandas, just because they have a bit more bass. But again, Hifiman makes good sounding headphones, but quality control is not the best. We've had to adjust a couple of scores, not only for the 400i, the Edition X, and the Sundara, because something went wrong. So although the Anandas are a little cheaper and they sound pretty good, durability might be an issue. That's where I have my gripes. But what do you think?
I actually do agree with you mostly. So I would say if you don't want to EQ your headphone, then Ananda would sound more neutral and sound better out of the box. But the HD800S has a slightly better soundstage, I would say. It measures slightly better, as you can see. And also when I listen to it, it sounds slightly better in terms of soundstage. But again, that could be frequency response dependent, so it's hard to really say definitively. But I would say HD800S EQ'd, I would prefer it to Ananda. Without EQ, I would say Ananda by a hair. It sounds a bit more bass heavy and a little bit less bright, so a bit more balanced.
Okay, so on a different topic, how much do you smooth the frequency response measurements? Do you know this?
For frequency response, it's 1/12 of an octave. For isolation and leakage, it's 1/3 of an octave.
Okay, that kind of answers the rest of the questions a little bit. Do you believe there's much of a difference in terms of sound rather than power between various solid-state headphone amps? So I guess how much do amps affect the sound quality of the headphones? This is an interesting topic that eventually we want to have an article dedicated to it with multiple amps tested, with ideally even a blind test to see if people can tell the difference. We're leaning towards amps not making that big of a difference, but again.
Yeah, so I would say the same thing. Amps could sound different. I've heard different amps that sound noticeably different, but not by much. And it's not as important as people invest money in them. The bigger difference is going to be in the headphone itself. I would say, I was going to make another point. Oh, so the main difference that amps make is in terms of how loud they can drive your headphones. So if you have a high impedance headphone, low sensitivity, you're going to need a more powerful amp to drive it properly, but the sound is not going to change as much as people say they think it changes the sound.
Like there's definitely like a point where investing more into an amp doesn't really change much.
Yeah.
So again, once we have the full article, we will have a bit more like firm data. But for now, we are leaning towards the fact that amps do not change as much the frequency response as like a lot of let's say audiophile community.
Yeah. If you have a decent amp, you don't need to worry about getting something more expensive or better necessarily. You can get a better headphone or I don't know, listen to less compressed music if you're listening to a really compressed audio file. Yeah.
So another question about the smoothing, which actually works for the Ananda. So how audible are like the little bumps that we have?
Yeah, they are audible. Well, it's hard to tell how audible it is with music, but when I'm doing this sweep on myself or on the other people that we measure headphones on, you do hear the steps. But if I open the Edition X, you'll see that the Edition X has more steps compared to the Ananda. So the Ananda is the steps in Ananda are less audible. But again, we hear it in a testing condition. I'm not sure how audible that would be with proper music. So yeah, and also you will see it in the distortion part of the Edition X versus Ananda. But yeah, when you do the sweep, you hear the steps.
So we're going to wrap up here. Again, do let us know if you have questions in general. You can always either use the new discussion feature that we have on the website, or if you're a contributor, send it through email. Yeah, so we're always trying to improve our tests. We're always trying to add more tests so that we can really thoroughly test all the aspects of a headphone. Like I said, we have a pretty long list in the test bench, but we're always willing to add more so that we are the definitive place to come to when comparing the actual measurements of the headphones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one last question we can probably squeeze
Sure.
in your opinion, is there a sound difference between running the 800S balanced or unbalanced?
I would say no. So the main difference between a balanced and an unbalanced system is the noise that the cable picks up in the pathway, and because the cable is not too long, then it's not going to pick up that much noise. The amp that we have, Ragnarok, it's actually designed as a balanced amp, so it's supposed to perform better when you're using it balanced. I listened to it balanced and unbalanced. For me, it was really hard to hear the difference. The Ragnarok can put a lot more power when you use it balanced, way more that it can put it output unbalanced. And if you have like a planar magnetic headphone that is not really sensitive, maybe it would make sense to use that in balanced mode, but I haven't heard a noticeable difference.
All right, so thank you again for tuning in, and thank you guys for participating. The next Q&A will most likely be about TVs, but yeah, so in 2 weeks we will most likely have a TV Q&A.
And the next headphone QA?
Maybe in the month, but we'll see. We'll
okay,
see.
And it's going to be about?
Not sure yet.
Okay.
Maybe there might be maybe the XM3. Right?
Yeah,
maybe
that's what I was like getting at. That is probably going to be like QC35-2 versus XM3. Yeah, and the XM3 review is going to be coming out
hopefully
pretty soon, tomorrow,
hopefully
or
tomorrow,
maybe.
but we'll see.
Next week.
All right. So thanks again.
Bye guys.